then I would come to Borislav here, is you have heard now a lot of the other speakers and things like that. And I'm glad that Lena pointed out the role of civil society kind of thing. So looking at it now and looking at how we move forward, and particularly in the light of what has been said, that we need to extract, I believe, smuggling and how we understand it, extract it as really different from migration, not in this sorry, really different from trafficking kind of thing, and to have a different sense which will give us a sense of why people are that instinct to survive, as Donato puts it. So what role can NGOs and human rights society communities play in advancing this perspective in relation to smuggling? Boris?
Thank you. Thank you, Willem, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. If it's okay, first I would like to respond to a question you posed to someone else earlier, and this was you asked whether smuggling should be seen as a crime and if there is a humanitarian aspect to it. And I strongly agree with you. There is, and we know from qualitative research that in many cases smugglers are people in communities, in border communities, who simply provide a service for a price, yes, but many of them do care about the safety of the migrants that they are helping cross borders. So I think from our point of view as NGOs, smuggling does not need to be a crime, and because it's basically a crime against the state and not against the person or against the human rights of a person. And I also want to point out the obvious fact that smuggling exists because of state restrictions.
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that? That is, I can see Boris taking notes. Can you repeat? Donato taking notes. Can you repeat that? It is not a crime.
I said it's a crime against state borders or
Okay.
against state. It's not a crime against human rights of people.
Okay, great. Continue.
Yeah. So yeah, I also wanted to say what I guess was kind of said already in a way, that smuggling exists because of states' restrictive migration and asylum policies. So when states crack down on one smuggling route, we know that another one appears, which is usually more expensive and more dangerous and results in harms for migrants. So in a way, anti-smuggling measures have negative impact on migrants themselves who can't reach their destination countries, whether for safety or for economic opportunities. And this is why I think for human rights NGOs, it's not really appropriate or necessary to say that you work against smuggling or you work to prevent smuggling or to combat smuggling. Still, some things that human rights NGOs can do in the area of smuggling as part of GCM or the smuggling protocols are, the broader measures to promote safe migration, for example, by informing migrants about existing and legal migration opportunities or recruitment fees, migration fees, and so on. NGOs should also advocate with their governments for more regular channels for migration and asylum. Also, even as I say that smuggling is not a violation of human rights, there are violations of human rights in the process of the migrants in the process of smuggling, which is referred in the smuggling protocol as aggravated forms of smuggling. This is when migrants are endangered or tortured or detained unlawfully and so on. So in these situations, human rights NGOs can provide assistance to migrants in a situation of aggravated smuggling. NGOs can also help with distinguishing migration smuggling from trafficking, as you pointed out. This needs to be done. NGOs can also contribute to collection and dissemination of information about smuggling, about smuggling routes, the experiences of migrants, and so on. And they can also hold their governments accountable for the implementation of their commitments related to smuggling under the smuggling protocol or GCM. And these commitments are, for example, not to criminalize migrants, to provide protection to migrants in smuggling situations from violence, death, torture, or other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, to and to ensure safety in return and preventing refoulement. This is another obligation according to the protocol, and to address the socioeconomic causes of smuggling, such as poverty and underdevelopment.
Thanks, and thanks for that whole kind of perspective on what NGOs can be doing, kind of thing. And like I said earlier, I think, state authorities and development agencies have pumped so much money into trafficking, because of it, and that very little is looked at exactly what you are saying for civil society organizations to actually look at smuggling and understand the socioeconomic conditions that lead to that, or other conditions like Donato was saying that lead to this and things like, and that might be something that NGO. We also heard Lena say that how difficult it is becoming for NGOs who do that kind of work. In your own experience as GADW, and are there any specific corridors and country, because I know yours is a global kind of network, uh, are there any specific corridors or regions that have understood this, that these are two different frameworks kind of thing? Lena gave the example of Europe actually becoming more constraining, but is there any other region in the world that have understood this and on the right track of unpacking it?
No, I don't think so. As you and others pointed before me, the states kind of tend to talk about trafficking and smuggling in the same breath, and combating them and in the same way almost. And I mean, I guess it's not that relevant, but for example, in Spanish, trafficking is trata and smuggling is tráfico. So even the words are a bit confusing, and NGOs in Latin America speak about trata y tráfico, trafficking and smuggling in the same breath again. Um, and yeah, so as I said, while NGOs can work to combat human trafficking or to prevent human trafficking, they don't necessarily need to do the same with smuggling. In terms of regions, um, in general, I think Latin America is a bit more open in the area of migration, more progressive from our perspective in protecting human rights and providing opportunities for migration. We know that Africa is hosting a lot of refugees and asylum seekers, um, perhaps more so than Europe. But in this day and age, I think I don't need to say that there is a lot of hostility towards migrants everywhere in the world, but more so in the more developed regions and countries like US, EU, Australia, um, and yeah, and this applies to all categories, so to speak, of migrants, whether they are irregular or economic migrants or refugees. Maybe to a lesser extent, victims of trafficking. There is generally more sympathy for victims of trafficking, um, but yeah, I would say there is no region that gets everything right about migration.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I did see former Foreign Secretary of Bangladesh, Shahidul Haq. So if you are still there, sir, I would like to call on you for a 2-minute intervention as well. But let me come back to the panel again for another round. And I will ask you to put on a different hat. Put on the hat of from this day forward. And when I'm saying put on a different hat from this day forward, in the last webinar, we heard somebody say, or in one of the webinars, I heard somebody say over this last week, everything has changed and nothing has changed. So when we say everything has changed, meaning we have never envisioned a time like this in our world, when the whole world would shut down like this. And we have seen how it has devastated economies and how it has created a lot of political change and things like that on the ground. So looking at this anomaly of the last 20 years in clumping this thing of migration after smuggling and trafficking under one protocol, of looking at this whole thing of borders and border controls and keep people out, and this kind of whole approach that we saw that led to a global compact which called for a 350-degree vision, which called for an all of society, all of government approach and things like that. Now, when we look at coming out of COVID and looking at how what it has done, is it worth looking at also saying it's time to go back to the drawing board and see how some of what is there in these policies and things like that have to have a much more future hopeful building back better element to it? And if that is the case, then what would it be?